So I want to return to the topic of social media platforms, its benefits, but more in particular, its detriments, as the impact of social media platforms definitely are shaping Western culture as we know it across the full spectrum of society. Now, what you see here on this screen is a rather interesting painting. At the University of Alberta, we have Timothy Caulfield and his brother Sean, who is a professional artist, a renowned artist in his own right. And together, they are fighting the COVID-19, what they call the infodemic. So the Caulfield brothers, they have a multi-pronged campaign against pseudoscience called the coronavirus outbreak, mapping and countering misinformation in support of the federal government's rapid research funding opportunity created for such endeavors. The overall aim of this project, of which this is one painting, is to assess how COVID-19 misinformation spreads through mainstream and social media and through such engines as Google and others, and more importantly, to find ways to fight back. So the lack of clarity is the whole point. As they explain, the viewer is meant to stop and think perhaps and shift perspective on an issue around which there has been too much noise. So some of these paintings that Sean Caulfield that he is creating are really quite intriguing, and you need to spend some time with them because the whole objective here is for you to spend some time looking at this and ask yourself, well, what is going on here? Research tells us that if you just get people to think about an issue, to pause and think about accuracy, it can make a difference. So these are compelling pieces of art. And this is about social media. That's what I think that's an ear horn. And you can see at the bottom information going in, and what is spewing out the horn itself is different from what is going in. So today I'm going to join Timothy and Shaw Caulfield in sharing with you quite a bit of current research and how the misuse of social media platforms is impacting our democratic institutions and society as a whole. So this week, I'm going to focus on context, and then on May 22nd, when I return, I will address the challenges, but also I will look at what is the Christian response. How can we fight back? Now, Renee DeRista is the research manager at the Stanford Internet Observatory in Palo Alto, California, where she investigates the spread of malign narratives across social networks and assists policymakers in understanding and responding to the problem. She advises the United States Congress, State Department, and other organizations on the continual flow of disinformation and computational propaganda that is impacting our governments, society, and for that matter, our democracy. Now, DeResta purports that we are immersed in an evolving and ongoing conflict where our adversaries are leveraging the social infrastructure that underpins everyday life as a means to sow discord and erode shared reality. She says this: disruptions in social media platforms are often perceived as organic online chaos driven by emergent, bottom-up amateur actions, when a substantial amount is in fact helped along or instigated by systematic top-down institutional and state actions. Now, I'm going to share a few things that are along the lines of politics, but bear with me. Now, who could ever forget the brazen request by Donald Trump just a few weeks before the 2016 election? And he said, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. And of course, these were Hillary Clinton's emails that were missing. He says, I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press. Now, he stated that it was a joke. But after further investigation, it turned out that that same day that the Russians made their first effort to break into Clinton's servers. And a 29-page indictment, which came out in 2018, charged 12 Russians with election fraud. Russian interference in Brexit. They believe there was quite a bit of that going on as well. Last year, this time on May 7, 2021, do you remember the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack? Do you remember that? An American oil pipeline system that originates in Houston, Texas, and carries gasoline and jet fuel mainly to the southeastern United States suffered a ransomware cyber attack that impacted computerized equipment managing the pipeline. And it was proven to be state-sponsored interference. Now, DeResta says this. She says, this is a kind of warm war, not the active, declared open conflict of a hot war, which is what we're seeing in Ukraine, but beyond the shadow boxing of a cold one. Remember that term, a warm war. Cyber warfare is a warm war. Now, what you've just heard is fairly startling, I realize. And I've paraphrased some of what DeResta conveys here. But her research delves into the realm of information wars and has ideological and international implications. And there are more than a few that are convinced that these are some of the things that we are facing today. But what I want to do for the next couple of weeks, I want to attend to her thinking as it pertains to the reality of the everyday experience of social media platforms and what is transpiring before our very eyes with little or no comprehension to its present impact or its future implications. Now, we would all have to agree that science and technology has been of tremendous benefit to us. During the pandemic, of course, the vaccines became available to all of us in rapid succession. A lot of that's because of the science and technology and the advancements. But I think you would have to agree with me that the progress that has come with social media has brought benefits as well as detriments. We've all come to enjoy Facebook, Twitter, Google. However, the misuse of these mediums is having an erosive effect on society as we know it. Now, I'm providing some information here. Now, I'm giving you here the websites and the links so you can go and hear and read some of these things that I'm showing you here today. Now, Obama gave a speech, Barack Obama, you all know who he is, at the Stanford Cyber Policy Center just last month. And he was talking about the weakening of democratic institutions in recent decades. So he cites here that in North America, we've seen a steady decline in the number of people participating in unions, civic organizations, houses of worship. And he calls these, he said, these are mediating institutions that once served as what he called the communal gluten. Houses of worship, the communal gluten. So the progress that we have made technologically over the last 10 to 15 years, especially in the domain of social media, has reaped unintended consequences. What Obama described as this new ecosystem is turbocharging some of humanity's worst impulses. These are his words. But he went on to say, one of the principal reasons for democracy's weakening is the profound change in how we consume and communicate information. Now, I don't know about you, but I find myself increasingly alarmed with the downward spiral of public discourse in recent years. I believe that social media platforms, as beneficial as they have been, have contributed to this. Now, I don't know how many of you subscribe to The Atlantic. That's probably one of the better magazines out there. It comes out monthly. These are long read articles, but they're very good. I'm going to draw from an article here today that was in the Atlantic, as you can see there, why the past 10 years of American life have been uniquely stupid, by Jonathan Haidt. Okay, that's quite a catchy title, I realize. But, you know, most of the information out there in terms of research, they're focusing on the United States, which is the richest and most powerful country in the world. I contend that we as Canadians, although our cultures are not identical by any stretch, nonetheless, we can extrapolate from this research and draw parallels. But this article it's a riveting read. Now, he mentions various researchers, and I'm going to draw on a few of them. Alexander Bohr and Michael Bang-Pedersen. Now, these are both Danish scholars who are in the realm of political science. And you can see they're at the Aarhus University in Denmark. And again, there's the link. The Psychology of Online Political Hostility. Interesting. They have done postdoctoral research and found that a small subset of people on social media platforms are highly concerned with gaining status and are willing to use aggression to do so. They further determined that being online did not make most people more aggressive or hostile. Rather, it allowed a small number of aggressive people to attack a much larger set of victims. It's a small number, relatively speaking, that is causing us the kind of grief that we are beginning to experience. Additional research found that women and black people are harassed disproportionately so that the digital public space is less welcoming to their voices. This is what their research is finding. So it's not that we have a huge number of individuals creating havoc online. Rather, we have a small number of individuals having greater access to huge swaths of society due to these platforms with detrimental effect. Now, let me introduce another study here as I create context for what will come on May 22nd. This is a think tank called More in Common. And their research, America's 7 Tribes, the Hidden Tribes Study, and there again is the link. It's about a 50-page document. But it's interesting. They identified 7 groups that shared beliefs and behaviors, and they surveyed over 8,000 Americans in their study. I don't know how well you can see all that. But you'll notice there that at the bottom you have the 7 categories, but on the extremities you have what they call the wings, and then in the center, thank you very much, in the center they have what they call the exhausted majority. I don't know if that's where you fit or not, but nonetheless, this is what they're saying. But they said the furthest to the right, the devoted conservatives, represent 6% of the population. And the furthest to the left are the progressive activists, and they represent 8% of the population. So that's 14% between them. So the progressive activists were by far the most prolific group on social media. Now this is just a list of those 7 groups. And so the top and the bottom those are the ones that we're looking at. But you can see here, if you want to come back to this later and spend a little time with this gives a description of each one of those groups. And I will say, going back to this exhaustive majority, the largest group there, 26%, were people who were politically disengaged. The largest group, big surprise, politically disengaged. But they found that with these groups, the progressive activists and the devoted conservatives who are on the wings, they found that 70% of these people shared political content. And the devoted conservatives, 56 shared political content. So these two extreme groups are similar in surprising ways, because these two extreme groups are those who are the most active online. And it's these two extreme groups that's causing us quite a bit of concern. But they are similar in surprising ways. One, they are the whitest and richest of the 7 groups. Interesting. The whitest and the richest of the 7 groups. And secondly, they are the 2 groups that show the greatest homogeneity in their moral and political attitudes. So, this uniformity of opinion, the study authors speculate, is likely a result of thought policing on social media. Thought policing. Those who express sympathy for the views of opposing groups may experience backlash from their own cohort. So this is interesting, because they're not only angry and reaching out against those of opposing views, but they're also targeting those amongst them who are sympathetic to the views of others. In other words, those of more extreme views, the 6% are devoted conservatives and the 8% are progressive activists, they aren't hostile just to those deemed as adversaries. They spend a lot of their time targeting dissenters or nuanced thinkers within their own camp. Now, as I try to think about this, and I see what's going on in the States, and I look at the Republican Party in the States, have you noticed since 2020 how many of these those from the House of Representatives and the Senate, how many of the moderates have retired? A lot. A lot of them have retired. Why is that? It's because those who are of more radical views are going after them online and making life miserable for them. And they're leaving in droves. Who's going to replace them? That's the scary thought. So what this leads to is everyone administering justice with no process, with no due process. A successful attack attracts a barrage of likes and follow-on strikes. And enhanced virality platforms thereby facilitate massive collective punishment for small or imagined offenses with real-world consequences. Small or imagined offenses with real-world consequences. That means people are losing jobs. Some people have been driven to suicide as a result of the piling on that takes place online. Frightening. Frightening. When our public square is governed by mob dynamics, unrestrained by due process, we don't get justice and inclusion. We get a society that ignores context, proportionality, mercy, and truth. In this way, social media makes a political system based on compromise grind to a halt. Now, I want you to just reflect for a moment or two. I don't know, some of you are older, some of you are younger here, but I was around in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. In those days, we had two major television networks for the most part, CBC and CTV. And I tried to think back of who were the news anchors in those days. I don't know if you can remember some of these people. Knowlton Nash, Earl Cameron, I barely remember him, but Lloyd Robertson. Peter Mansbridge, he started in the late 80s, 1988, and of course, Adrian Clarkson, same time frame. But it was during these years, while media from those earlier eras had their own set of problems, and that is that they didn't really include women very much in those kinds of roles in those days, nor people of color. But they did provide people with a shared culture. These media institutions, with established journalistic best practices for accuracy and accountability, also provided people with similar information. If you watch the news on one channel and go to another, you're going to get pretty much the same news. So when it came to the news, at least citizens across the political spectrum tended to operate using a shared set of facts. Now fast forward to today, where everyone has access to individualized news feeds that are fed by algorithms that reward the loudest and angriest voices. You have the sheer proliferation of content and the splintering of information and audiences. And this is truly complicating things for us in Western society. Now, I want to finish up. I want to return to Obama just for a moment. I find a certain term that's cropping up quite a bit in the reading that I'm doing these days. And it's something that is called a confirmation bias. Have you heard that term? It's the tendency to select facts and opinions that reinforce our pre-existing worldviews and a filtering out of those that don't. Now you think about that. That's a reality in the times in which we live. So social media platforms with their algorithms are isolating people further in their own personal bubbles of information with their assumptions and blind spots, hence the term echo chambers. And prejudices are not challenged, but rather they are reinforced. So people begin reacting negatively to those who think differently from them. And this is how racial and religious and cultural divides are being reinforced. We lose our capacity to distinguish between fact and fiction. And what has evolved is a competition between truth and falsehood, cooperation and conflict, and the very design of these platforms are tilting us in the wrong direction. So says Obama. It's not necessary for people to believe this information in order to weaken democratic institutions. You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage, raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, and plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe. And here's the man that has perfected that. Steve Bannon. It's called The Fire Hose of Falsehood. And here are some of those who are buying into his philosophy and his tactics. Marie Le Pen, she didn't win, but she got 42% of the vote. Every election, the right-wing radical movement is gaining. It's gaining. So what I've described for you here this morning, I realize it's a lot of information, but it's causing greater polarization within our society, these social media platforms. There's more division in families as a result of it. There's a surge in hostility one toward another, and intolerance for those who look or think or believe or whose lifestyles are different from us has exacerbated. And on the list goes. Now, I'm going to come back to you on the 22nd and finish up. But what I will want to do on that day is I'll want to look at this from a sociological perspective, but I want to look at what are the steps being taken politically to address the imbalance between the tech giants and Western culture. What are we actually doing to come to terms with this? Because some good things are happening. And as well as, where do we find ourselves as Christians? What is the church's response to this kind of force that is active in the culture in which we live? And it's not going away. And we have to come to terms with it. And we cannot afford to be complacent. We just can't. And there are things that are being done, and there are things that we can do that can help us in coming to terms with what we are facing. I'd like to offer prayers for a few moments as we move toward the conclusion of our service today. O God, if you build the house, who can destroy it? If you establish a covenant, who can defeat your purpose? If you turn against your people in righteous judgment, who can withstand your anger? Yet you have assembled a people and called them your own. You have built mighty temples for your people and accepted their praise. You have set your sign in the heavens that you will never withdraw your blessing. And you have sent Christ as the eternal seal of your love. Nothing can separate us from your redeeming graciousness. We thank you that you call and name us Christ's church. Make us worthy servants in his name. Set us apart so that we can witness to your commandment, your reconciliation, your righteousness, and your peace. Help us to build a society where justice reigns, where the weak are empowered and not exploited. Give us a sense of what is right so that what we do is in accord with Christ's will, and still within us those turbulent fears of our own making and those inflicted upon us. When thoughts of inadequacy grip us, remind us of Christ who hung on the cross that we might live. And when we are attacked in pursuit of your righteousness, surround us with the armor of your impenetrable spirit. When all around us there is evidence of suffering, and when cries of injustice arise from those seeking a sign of compassion, keep us attuned to your call to be ambassadors for Christ and ministers of reconciliation. I'm flashing up One last painting here as we continue in prayer. This is simply called a mother. As we think of Mother's Day the world over. Gorshev, Russian painter in 1995, he painted this. It's from a series called Scorched by the Fire of War. I want to read you something and then we're going to pray a little bit more. A bareheaded elderly woman sits sadly meditating, her heavy head resting on her hand, coarsened by excessive toil. The situation is extremely clear. The woman has completely abandoned herself to anguish and despair. She is crushed by sorrow, numbed by the pain of loneliness. Yet she embodies not only a suffering woman, but also a heroine, capable of overcoming and surmounting her personal grief. And oh God, as we continue before you, we are mindful of mothers all over this world who are suffering this day due to war. We think of those in Ukraine who have lost sons, daughters, partners. We think of the millions who are now refugees, the children and the mothers who are there, and the anguish that they undergo as they have left everything they've ever known and thrown themselves upon the goodness of the world community. But the heartache, oh God, we cannot begin to comprehend. And we simply ask that this day that they would find some solace. And may you work through the lives of others as they are there to help them to rebuild a destroyed life. And God, we are so conscious of the evil that exists in this world, and may you raise up from among us those who will be able to confront it, and that goodness will overcome. We pray for the leaders of our nations as they endeavor to grapple with these kinds of issues. Give them wisdom, the decisions that they make that impact all of us. We pray for our medical community, as always, doctors, nurses, caregivers, and ask that as they continue to help us through this pandemic, we think of the hundreds that are in hospital even now with COVID. May they find healing, and may you give all of those in the medical world who are on the front lines, give them energy and help to sustain them, because it is very, very overwhelming. So God, we thank you for all that you do for each and every one of us. And let us share together the Lord's Prayer as you see before you. Our Father and Mother, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.